Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Midsummer Captives by Lea Doué, narrated by Zehra Naqvi. Chapter 1. One sister down, 10 to go. Gwen rubbed her temples just as the carriage jolted to the left, dumping her into her sister Hazel's lap. She righted herself, and neither of them bothered to apologize for the 50th time. A downed tree had forced them to detour off the well-maintained forest road onto an old logging trail, and despite the velvet lining the walls, her shoulders and head ached after taking one too many bumps. She would much rather be on her horse. Hazel had insisted that riding in the rain was unladylike, so Gwen had obediently come inside. This trip was about helping her sister make the right match, not about her own comfort. The only good thing about riding in the carriage was that Theo couldn't bother her in here. He seemed to support the popular opinion concerning the two of them. As the second of the 12 princesses of Ituria, and with her oldest sister's engagement barely a month old, Gwen had already been matched in many people's minds with Prince Theodoric of Austria, who had travelled south to escort his brother home. But she had no interest in Theo or anyone else. Right now, Hazel, younger by a year, was her priority, and there were 9 more sisters after her. She peeked out the window. Theo rode nearby, his short yellow hair darkened by the rain. He'd taken off his cloak, a good sign. The 3 dragon soldiers flanking him had done the same. So the rain had stopped, but she was still stuck in the carriage. Theo glanced her way, and she leaned back quickly, not sure if he'd seen her. No need to give him the wrong idea. She was only checking the weather, for the 50th time. "Why are you in here anyway, Your Highness?" asked Hazel's 14-year-old maid, Bay, blunt as ever. She stared pointedly at Gwen, her tight black curls refusing to touch her shoulders in the humidity. "You hate small spaces, and you ride all the time in bad weather." The other 2 maids ignored her, having grown used to her curiosity and Hazel's tolerance of it. "Princesses don't ride in the rain," Gwen said. "Really?" Bay's nose scrunched up, as if this were a new rule she hadn't yet learned. Considering she'd seen no less than 5 of Gwen's sisters riding in the rain at various times, it was no wonder she was confused. "Not when we're being escorted by 2 princes of Austria," Gwen said to clarify, "one of whom may be my brother-in-law some day." She glanced at Hazel and grinned when she turned red. Even blushing, she was the prettiest of the 12 sisters, the only blonde too. Her hair was naturally a dark golden yellow, the same shade as Theo's was in the rain. "Gwen?" Hazel's voice carried a warning. She sighed. "I know." A princess didn't discuss personal matters in front of maids. "One of them might be Princess Hazel's brother-in-law some day too," Bay said with a sly grin. "Not likely," Gwen said, "and you can count that as reason number 2 why I'm riding in this wheeled hat box." One of the maids rolled her eyes and peeked out the curtain on the other side. "Go ahead and open it," Gwen said. Sunlight struggled through the thick canopy of the ling forest, dappling the bushes and briars lining the road. A blanket of ferns dotted with moss-covered logs and splashes of orange flowers stretched into the interior, thick with shades of green too numerous to name. They'd passed into Austria some time ago and had yet to come out from under the trees. Gwen longed for the plains they had yet to reach, where the blue sky stretched from one horizon to another. The trees here were too much like a roof, the logging path a narrow hall with no end in sight. Theo's younger brother Horlick had promised to let her ride a hill pony. Horlick had visited during the Dragon Festival over 6 weeks ago and had quickly become friends with all of her sisters. He'd helped them get through a tough time with a sorcerer and a curse, and he hadn't wanted to leave Hazel after that, so his father sent Theo to fetch him. The King of Austria had kept his 2 remaining sons close after losing both his heir and his wife over 4 years ago in an attack by razor-tail dragons. Although razor-tail sightings were infrequent along the main roads, Anyone travelling through the Ling hired dragon soldiers these days. There had no less than 12 of them this trip, 8 on horseback, 2 driving the carriage, 1 acting as footman, plus Horlick's bodyguard. And the maid who served as their camp cook carried herself suspiciously like a woman trained in battle. Gwen should know. She and her sisters had a retired dragon soldier as a governess for years. She peeked out the window again. Theo chatted with one of the soldiers. He glanced her way twice, but she didn't bother to close the curtain this time. "You may as well go ride now," Hazel said. "No, I'm fine. It's wet out, so we're better off in here." Her gaze strayed to the window where the maid still pretended to ignore their conversation. The cook pressed her lips together against a smile. "I know you want to," Hazel said. "Besides, you can't keep hiding whenever someone shows an interest in you." "Why not? And I'm not hiding." Was it that obvious? "You're the one who said it wasn't ladylike to ride in the rain." "It's not raining anymore." No, it wasn't. But Theo still watched the carriage, waiting to what? Talk to her? Her sister Melantha would laugh to hear she was afraid to talk. Still, she wanted an excuse to avoid him if she went out. "Ride with me." She grasped Hazel's hands. Hazel wrinkled her nose. "It's still wet out." "You just said it's not raining anymore. It's perfectly acceptable for a lady to ride now." "Acceptable, yes, but the trees are dripping." "So?" Hazel raised a golden eyebrow. Gwen knew, as all the sisters did, that she didn't argue with that eyebrow. Knowing and doing were 2 different things. "Remember why I'm here?" Gwen said with a pointed look. When Theo had invited them both to visit his home, Gwen had only agreed because of Hazel, who had been as reluctant as Horlick to say goodbye, but hesitant to commit to anything more. Hazel obviously wanted Gwen to give Theo a chance during this trip, but Gwen was determined to do no such thing. She'd already fallen for one brother, and look what had happened to him. No one knew, of course. Not even her oldest sister, Lily, her confidant and best friend. This wasn't how Gwen had envisioned visiting Orsha's capital. 4 years ago, when Theo's older brother, Prince Edric, had visited her family to meet the heir, Gwen had spent much of the summer apologizing for Lily's busy schedule and gladly escorting Edric around in her place. Her 16-year-old self had imagined he'd welcomed her company. For the first time in her life, she'd allowed herself to daydream about a future that included more than her sisters. She'd seen herself wearing a flowing gown and riding a beautiful charger, parading into the capital next to Edric, crown on her head. Not the circlet she wore as a princess, but the crown of the co-heir of Orsha. But Edric and all of his travelling companions, including his mother, had been lost on their way home. She'd mourned silently, mortified to admit she'd dared see herself as anything more than second best, that she'd dared to think that she could fill the same kind of role her own mother did, that she'd dared to think she could do it better. Mother was right. She had no business being a queen. "Please, Hazel?" She wanted her sister by her side. Theo had become more persistent since they'd left the palace. Hazel sighed and looked resigned. "Viv, please inform the driver we wish to stop." She brushed away a few wrinkles on her tunic, smoothed out her leggings, and tucked up a strand of hair that had escaped her braid. She'd refused to wear a pair of Gwen's dragon-wing leggings, which didn't wrinkle, had just enough stretch to move well, and were almost waterproof. They would have been too short for her anyway. Gwen didn't bother checking her own hair. It always stayed where she put it, and the low knot felt as secure as it had that morning. Her shirt and tunic, not quite the same rich brown as Bay's skin, had as many wrinkles as they should after a week of travel. Bay herself blended into the shadows of the carriage in black-brown clothes as dark as Gwen's hair. "Can I come too, Princess?" Bay bounced on the seat, always eager to practice her new riding skills. "Yes," Hazel said, "but you're riding with me, and remember, Bouncing is not ladylike. Bay stilled and folded her hands in her lap, but her feet swished a quiet rhythm against the floorboards. She clearly didn't like being cooped up any more than Gwen did. The carriage stopped. Gwen grabbed an apple from the lunch basket before letting the footman help her out. She untied Buttercup from the back of the carriage. He bumped her with his nose and lipped her sleeve, eager for a ride and a treat. By the time Theo joined her on his blue roan, she had Buttercup saddled and ready to go. "You never told me how he got his name," Theo said. Gwen mounted, grinning at the memory. "I let the twins name him. It was that or Bucky." An obvious choice for the buckskin, but she had vetoed that one. "Which set of twins?" Theo asked. "Oh, Ruby and Wren." The youngest of the sisters had been 8 at the time and in love with painting flowers. 3 years later, they still loved painting, but the only flower they painted these days was Buttercup himself, usually with Gwen posing on his back. She rode to the other side of the carriage, where a guard helped Bay get seated behind Hazel. Theo followed. Gwen rubbed her forehead. Avoiding him for the whole trip wasn't going to be easy. Discouraging his interest might be even harder. She managed to sandwich Hazel between her and Theo as they got back underway. Despite the heat, Hazel had draped herself in a cloak to avoid the dripping trees, which made for muffled conversation. Gwen finally let her drift back to ride beside Horlick, and Theo quietly filled the gap. The forest itself was far from quiet. Inside the carriage, the sounds had been dampened or unheard, but now birds filled the canopy with late summer chatter, and tiny brown and yellow butter-winged dragons sifted through the leaf litter in search of delicacies. The carriage creaked and groaned through the mud, and wisps of conversations floated through the air. She wiped her brow. The midsummer heat had barely lessened the farther north they'd gone. "I think they're conspiring against us," Theo said. She glanced behind. Hazel's hood pulled around her shoulders, and she chatted with Horlick, his short orange hair sticking in all directions despite the rain. Bay waved and gave them a sunny smile. "Or maybe they're conspiring for us?" Theo's brows rose with a hopeful look. The little traitors. They knew she was trying to avoid him. She clenched her teeth, determined not to take the bait. He tried to draw her out with small talk, but she put him off politely with smiles and generic answers. Rumours in Elticon were one thing, but rumours in his own capital were another. She needed to stop them before they had a chance to get started, especially since he might soon be her brother-in-law. She would be friendly, but not encouraging, although she hated to think that her friendliness might have already given him the wrong idea. "Butterball looks like he could use a good run." Her face flushed. He did not just insult her horse. Her eyes narrowed and her back straightened, but she refused to look at him. How dare he exploit her weakness? She'd love a good gallop right now. A weaver dragon slipped from a branch overhead, its mottled green hide barely visible among the shadows. It swung back and forth from its own snapped web. Clumsy builders. Their extremely strong webs were still no match for their extremely sharp talons. Her sister Naylan had experimented once with weaver dragon threads, which were as thick as a half-dozen horsehairs. She'd braided them together, adding twigs and sticks to recreate one of their hanging circular nests in the gardens. It had worked, and they tried to see how many sisters could fit inside before it snapped. The branch broke first. Gwen preferred wearing weaver silk dresses. She should make a note of this place. Discarded webs littered the canopy, a seamstress's dream. Theo grinned as the dragon flapped and climbed back into the tree. "Come on. According to the map, there's a stream not far ahead that cuts under a bridge. We'll let the carriage catch up." She shouldn't. But really, what trouble could they get into? The outrider would have scouted that far ahead already and found a bridge, or they would have heard from him, and she wouldn't have to make small talk. The temptation was too much. She nodded to the nearest guard and said, "We'll meet you at the bridge." A glance at Theo, a nudge to Buttercup, and she took the lead with a leap. She stayed in the lead too. Whether Theo held his horse back on purpose or not, she didn't care. She let the rhythm of the ride help her forget about the prince chasing her. The trees blurred, the mud speckled her boots, and her heart joined in the race. The road followed the curves of the land, up and down ridges and around massive oaks and chestnuts as wide as a horse's stride. At this pace, she'd make it to the bridge too soon. She'd have to talk about horses or something until the others showed up. But she wasn't slowing down. Neither was Theo. Around the next curve in the road, she pulled Buttercup to a sharp halt. His front hooves lifted off the ground for a moment in alarm. Theo stopped his mount as quickly, and they both sat and stared at the great tree blocking the road, 3 times as big as the one that had turned them aside the first time. The road dipped underneath it, leaving a gap high enough for a person to crouch under, but a carriage wouldn't fit. And neither would a mounted dragon soldier. Where was their outrider? He should have reported back about the tree, just as he had done last time. "Will!" Theo called, studying the ground around the tree. As a hunter, he would recognize any tracks left by the soldier or his horse. This tree hasn't been down long, and there are hoof prints going into the forest there. He pointed up a small incline. Could he have gone after a dragon? She didn't want to say razor-tail. She didn't even want to think it. There were lots of other kinds of less vicious dragons in the forest. Theo shook his head. A dragon soldier wouldn't go after a dragon alone, especially one who's escorting a royal party. His brows drew down, and he scanned the forest as if it held clues to the mystery. Minutes passed. "I'm sure he's safe," she said finally. Not because she thought he was safe, but because Theo had already lost enough in these woods. As if knowing she guessed his thoughts, Theo studied her face. "I've always thought my mother and brother were still out here somewhere. Lost, maybe, or trapped." An unspoken word hung in the air between them, a word that, until this summer, she would have thought fit only for folk tales and legends. Sorcery. Theo knew the story of the sorcerer prince who had ensnared her and her sisters only weeks earlier in an attempt to gain his own freedom. A chill shot up her spine. Could it be possible something similar had happened to his mother and Edric? He dismounted and examined the ground closer. There were no tracks then either. "I thought you just saw tracks." "I saw hoof prints, but no razor-tail tracks. I was 18 when Eddie and Mother disappeared. Old enough to help with the search, but Father wouldn't risk it. Someone told me later. They blamed it on the dragons, but there were no tracks, and razor-tails don't swoop and carry off their prey." He shook his head and kicked at the dirt before remounting. "Should we investigate? He's an outrider, but he wouldn't go far on his own." Thea looked at her. No, he stared at her, as if seeing something for the first time and appreciating what he saw. "You'd really go in there, wouldn't you?" She looked past his shoulder into the deep green of the forest. Unlike Hazel, she wasn't a strictly stay-on-the-trail person, but she was no woodsman either. Still, if someone needed her... She shrugged. "Wouldn't you?" His eyes lit up, despite the worry on his face. "Let's get back to the others." She didn't argue. It was probably the wiser plan. They reached the carriage at a slow gallop. She joined Hazel and Bay. Despite her brave words to Theo, she was uneasy about the missing outrider and wanted them back in the carriage. Theo addressed the nearest soldier. "Has Will reported back yet?" "No, sir." While Theo explained about the tree and the tracks, Gwen told the girls to get inside. The driver stopped the carriage. "What about you?" Bay said. "It's probably nothing, but I can ride better than either of you. I don't want to weigh the carriage down." In case we have to flee. But she didn't need to say that part. However, The girls had no chance to get in the carriage or even dismount. A thundering, crashing sound erupted from deep in the forest to their left, like trees falling into each other, or being thrown. Seconds later, Will erupted from the woods and pulled his mount up short when he saw the other soldiers. His sword was snapped off at the hilt, and a deep gash stained his arm red from shoulder to elbow. "You must go," he panted. "Now!" "What happened?" Horlick asked, even as the carriage driver tried to turn his horses. The guards took up defensive positions. "There was a girl, running, scared. I tried to help, but she was too fast." He glanced over his shoulder. The crashing sounded nearer every second. Gwen stayed close to Hazel. Her horse wasn't battle-trained. Neither was Buttercup, for that matter. His muscles tensed, and fearful snorts punched through the noise of creaking leather and groaning wheels and clipped commands. Will took out his dagger. "There was a wild man, half-naked. He was blindfolded, screaming and waving his arms, and then the dragon started chasing me." He took a quick breath and glanced anxiously at the carriage, whose battle-trained horses stamped impatiently against their harness. "We must go. Leave the carriage, get everyone on horseback, and go." "Surely we can handle one dragon," Theo said. "Not this dragon. That man was a sorcerer, and this dragon—" In a storm of leaves and cracked branches, a massive dragon leaped out of the forest and landed in the middle of the track. The horses stamped their feet against the earth, which trembled from the weight of it. Joints grating like tumbling rocks, it ground to a halt about 100 feet behind the carriage, wingtips brushing the trees on either side of the road. The beast was made entirely of stone. Chapter 2. "Into the trees!" Gwen yelled at Hazel. They were no use against a flesh-and-blood dragon, much less this monstrosity, which was head and shoulders taller than the largest draft horse. Even razor-tails didn't grow that large, but this thing wasn't natural. The most they could hope for was to evade it while the dragon soldiers did what they were trained to do. The carriage horses bolted down the road before the driver could turn them around, but it didn't matter. Better that the tree stopped them than the stone dragon. She made it into the forest with Hazel following close behind, both horses eager to escape the battle. Soldiers shouted, and the dragon's movements grated against the air like a small rock slide. Metal clanked against stone. Judging from the state of Will's sword, that method of attack wouldn't get them far. Still, they outnumbered the dragon. She tried to ignore Will's warning that they couldn't handle it. A few 100 yards into the trees, Gwen stopped. "Shouldn't we keep going?" Bay asked. "We can't afford to get lost. Besides, they'll have that thing crushed in no time," she hoped. "I think we should keep going," Hazel said. Her hands gripped the reins tightly, and her mount fidgeted uneasily. If she didn't calm down, she'd lose control of him. Gwen couldn't risk that. It might draw the dragon's attention. She needed to help Hazel steady her nerves, give her a goal, something to keep her mind off the battle. Reluctantly, she nudged Buttercup further into the forest along the dragon's path, marked by scored earth and broken branches. If they stayed along this trail, they could find their way back to the road when they were ready. In the meantime, maybe they could solve a mystery. Because of her recent experience with sorcery, she had a niggling feeling that the girl and the wild man weren't what they seemed. An angry scream and shouting reached them from the road, followed by a shudder among the canopy, as if something had slammed into a tree trunk. Bay squeaked and clung tighter to Hazel. Gwen took a few deep breaths and tried to keep her voice conversational. "There's something odd about Will's story. He said he was trying to save a girl, but he lost her." "Maybe the sorcerer got her," Bay said. "I'm not so sure there is a sorcerer." "Then who sent the dragon?" Hazel's posture relaxed some, although her hands still clenched the reins. Good, the distraction was working. "I don't know. but why would that girl be running towards a sorcerer? Well, Bay frowned. Maybe the wild man isn't a sorcerer. Gwen paused for effect. Maybe he's Theo's brother. Prince Edric, Hazel said. But how? Never mind the details right now, but Theo thinks he could still be alive. What if he was warning Will about the dragon, not summoning it? She was starting to believe her own story. She had seen maps, and Theo had tried to explain the vastness of the Ling forest. It spread through most of Orsha, bleeding south into Ituria and north into Gritton. Who knew what secrets lay hidden within its green expanse? Nothing is straightforward with sorcery, she added. We learned that earlier this summer. But if the wild man is the prince, Hazel said, then who is the girl? His mother? I don't know. Bay whispered, maybe she's the sorcerer. That was possible. More possible than a stone dragon, which shouldn't exist. Gwen had already seen so much that shouldn't exist that a sorceress using a stone dragon to keep a supposedly dead prince captive didn't seem too far-fetched. The clash of battle barely reached them now. It was the perfect time to test their theory. If they could get close enough to see the wild man for themselves, surely she would know if it was Edric. It had only been 4 years since she'd last seen him. They could get him out while the soldiers distracted the dragon. She could already imagine the look on Theo's face if they showed up with his long-lost brother. Orlick would be shocked. He might even cry. I'm going to find out, Gwen said. Bay shook her head. No way. There's a sorcerer person in there. She's right, Hazel said. I'm not going far. Shouldn't we wait for the others? Hazel glanced back the way they'd come. I see no need to get the boys' hopes up only to have to disappoint them. She kept going, hoping Hazel's feelings for Horlick would spur her on. It worked. Fine, but we're only getting close enough to see if that man is Prince Edric or not. If he's even still there. Gwen didn't argue, but she did take the lead. They followed the stone dragon's path of destruction for a few minutes, still hearing an occasional clang from behind them. Surely the battle was nearly over. She nudged Buttercup to pick up his speed, but he ignored her and stopped instead. Hazel's mount stopped too. Both horses' ears swiveled backward, and Buttercup snorted. Leaves and twigs crunched behind them, and an unhorse-like grinding, scraping sound warned of something large approaching. A second stone dragon. Her heart thundered, and Buttercup shot forward, matching his stride to the rhythm. Bay screamed and cried out for Horlick. Hazel's mount panicked. It leaped into the lead, jumped over a small log, and dumped Bay onto the dirt. Gwen tried to rein Buttercup around to go back, but he wouldn't obey, no matter how hard she tried. She gave up and glanced over her shoulder. 50 yards behind and gaining, the dragon passed right by Bay, who'd rolled to the side and down a small incline. Bay stood unharmed and shouted, "Go!" The dragon's weight must have slowed it down, because it didn't catch up to them as fast as she expected. She nearly reached Hazel, and they were both just trying to stay seated. Branches and bushes clawed at them as the horses weaved through the trees, up and down slopes and over the stony ground. They couldn't keep doing this. The dragon would catch up eventually, and then what? She wouldn't see her sister mauled by a stupid rock monster. "Jump!" she shouted to be heard over the grinding of the dragon's joints. "Hazel, jump off!" "What? No, I can't!" "You have to! Find Bay! I'll join you!" Hazel wasn't going to do it. Gwen had to get her off the horse. The dragon had ignored Bay when she was on the ground. "It's after the horses!" That might be true, but guilt might work better. "You can't leave Bay alone out here!" Hazel risked a look back, and her eyes widened. The dragon was slowly gaining ground. "Jump!" Her sister jumped and remembered enough of their lessons with their governess/dragon soldier to roll when she landed. Gwen didn't slow to see.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?